Order, order. Before I start, an inhaler for asthma has been found, so anyone who's lost it, please go to the doorkeeper. So order, order. Graham Morris to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Edward. And I beg to move that this House consider the effect of the state pension changes on women born in the 1950s. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Edward, for the first time in this session, and I would like to thank everyone who has contacted me prior to this debate and to all those raising awareness of the issue and for all the support for the EDM on the order paper in my name, EDM number 63. It's a testament to the importance of the issue. I've been a Member of Parliament now for 7 years. I don't think I've ever seen as many Members of Parliament in the Westminster Hall, or indeed people in the public gallery and many others who can't get in. So I'm going to be disciplined, as you've requested, Sir Edward, in terms of my remarks. In relation to the EDM that was tabled, I have been told by members of the government party that the proposal contained in that EDM is unrealistic and no government would agree with the aims. However, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, but would you agree with me? I mean, I can remember this issue being raised when I was Shadow Pensions Minister at the start of the last Parliament. The longer this goes on and the government does nothing, does he agree with me that the government is simply slamming the door in the face of the 1950s women?
Absolutely. I'm grateful for that intervention, and clearly there is an opportunity, if I can develop my arguments, particularly with the new parliamentary arithmetic, there is an opportunity for the government to do something and to put right a wrong, an injustice that is glaring, and that, in fact, judging by the signatures of members of every party to EDM 63, that there is cross-party support for such a solution. I'll give way to my honourable friend, the member for Coventry South.
I think it's about time that most people would agree with me, it's about time this matter was resolved, because in the last Parliament for the last general election we had a lot of debates, but more importantly, when I then asked the Minister responsible to meet a delegation to discuss that, she refused. Don't you think that's a disgrace?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and yes, I do. I understand any pension changes are always going to be difficult and contentious, but in this case, there has been a clear injustice. I'll give way to my honourable friend from Newcastle North.
Giving way, and I think he is right that there is an opportunity to put this justice right, because the Conservative manifesto said very clearly that they abhor social division, injustice, unfairness and inequality, and have an opportunity to actually put their money where their mouth is, where the 1950s women are concerned. Yes.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that intervention. You're absolutely true, and I believe it's widely accepted that many of those affected by the 1995 Act did not receive adequate notification and as such did not have enough time to plan for their retirement. I'll give way to you. I'll give way to my honourable friend first. Yeah.
First of all, can I say to my honourable friend, it's really good to see him back in good health. I think everybody here would agree with that. Does my honourable friend agree with me? If the government can find £1 billion to prop itself up, it can find the money to ensure that women who have contributed to their families, our communities and our economy over so many years, the government can find the money if it can find £1 billion simply to save itself through a pact with the DUP.
I do agree with my honourable friend, and indeed there is an opportunity, given that there seems to be support from a substantial number of members of the DUP and indeed from the government party itself, who were members of the all-party WASPI group, to find such a solution. I'll give way to my good and honourable friend.
I thank my honourable comrade for giving way. This supposed mystical letter that so many women have supposed to have received about their retirement age, I've not met one constituent who received that letter. If we are talking about timescales, the government say that they don't have enough time frame. Many women in the country disagree with me, do not have enough time to prepare for this issue.
I'm grateful for that intervention, Sir Edwin, and I was just coming on to that point. Indeed, it's not a matter of my opinion, but indeed the former Pensions Minister, Steve Webb, said as much. And he said, I accept that some women did not know about it. In fact, Not everyone had heard about it at the time, and that was recorded in Hansard on the 8th of October. He did actually say, in fairness to the former Pensions Minister, it was in the papers at the time. However, I don't think that's good enough. Government has failed to contact anyone affected by the pension increase. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
You can see how many people are trying to get in. You've been very generous taking interventions, but the more interventions we have, the longer your speech, the less people will be able to get in. So I know it's entirely up to you, but you won't be too generous with interventions.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. But would it not be reasonable for women who would face a change in pension age of up to 5 or 6 years to expect a direct letter? And when the other response is, you could have asked and we had a leaflet, why would women ask when they thought they knew what the retirement age was?
Absolutely. Excellent point, well made. Well, I think you've heard the admonishment from the chair, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a little disciplined, if you don't mind. Go on then. Generous to a fault.
I'm very grateful, and I'm aware of the chair, and I have to declare an interest in that my wife is one of these women who has been affected and feels incandescent with rage. It's exactly as the Honourable Lady just said. She had no correspondence whatsoever. And the second point I would make, and I'm sure many of the ladies have found out, the HMRC website is incoherent. I was on it on Sunday morning, and the different information that you've got are contradictory, and I hope the Minister will do something about it.
Absolutely, and I think that's. I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I hope the Minister's taking due note. And I did check the HMRC website when quite a large delegation of women adversely affected by these changes came to see me. And there's quite a lot of information that's out of date, even the numbers. I think originally the numbers that were quoted were 2.4 million, and I think now it's generally accepted it's 3.5 million. I'll just give way one more time there, Sir Edward. One more time.
You're very generous, but are you aware, is my honourable friend aware, that just to get numbers into context, there's over 4,000 women in the Jarrow constituency alone who've been robbed, stolen of the thoughts of a happy retirement by a Tory government who are more willing to give £1 billion bung to the DUP in order to save their necks in government than it is to look after people who've worked a lifetime just to be happy in retirement.
Absolutely, and I think there is a moral argument here, and there's a factual argument, and I hope the Minister and his advisers will go away and reflect on the debates that have taken place, not just here this afternoon in the Westminster Hall, but in the last Parliament, a number of debates, and these arguments were soundly put. Personally, I find it difficult to understand how, in any other circumstances, this House would not consider this issue that various members and honourable members have raised about adequate notice or indeed no notice would not be a case of maladministration. Were it another government agency or local government, if any public body had failed in such a way, there would quite rightly be demands to support and compensate those affected. I think they're legitimate demands, and I understand they have been made collectively on behalf of the WASPI women in a joint letter that was sent to the department, and I hope the Minister may have an opportunity to comment on that in his closing remarks. The decision to accelerate the increases to the state pension further compounded these failings, impacting on the same cohort that had already been failed by the 1995 Act. And Age UK research found that some people affected who had not been aware of the 1995 legislation now face waits of up to 6 years more than they had been expecting before they can access their pension. I'll just give way one more time. It's like the last Gala plate, Mr. Lee. Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend is making a very good speech. And take up that point she's just been talking about. It's actually the human cost here, isn't it? Because a number of my constituents who came to see me about the fact that they've had a tuck-up or plan to take up caring responsibilities, they're facing real financial difficulty. And the difficulty, once you're over 60, of getting a decent job as well. These are real issues that the government needs to take on board. And it's about time that the government listened and found a way forward, not bury its head in the sand.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm grateful for that intervention. And indeed, I think every constituency is affected. My honourable friend, the member for Jarrow, said 4,000 in his constituency. I believe there are almost 5,000 in the Easington constituency. These women deserve both recognition for the injustice they've suffered and some kind of financial help to alleviate the poverty that many of them are now suffering. I know we have a shortage of time, but I've heard some harrowing stories from women, you know, who've worked all of their lives and now through change of circumstance have found themselves in a dire situation of having to sell their homes, facing enormous financial pressures through changes in legislation that they weren't aware of, and it really needs to be put right. For my part, the Labour Party, my party, intend to extend our commitment to pensions credit to hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable women. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Stockton North, is going to go into a little more detail about exploring the options for further transitional protections to ensure that all of the women have the security and dignity in old age. I will give way, but this is honestly just because of the Minister.
Except that I'm to be very brief, Sir Edward. I just want to try and clarify his position, because I looked at his own blog from June 2016, which maintained, and I quote it, that the 1995 Act timescales were such that they gave sufficient time for people to plan. The impression from that blog is that he had no criticism with the 1995 Act. Is that still the case?
I don't think that that's necessarily a fair reflection, and it was those changes, Sir Edward, were accelerated in 2011, and I don't think, for the sake of the record, that women were given adequate time, and in fact, they weren't given individual notification. There was a change in the legislation, and I think there's a duty on Parliament and on Government to notify all of those affected at the earliest opportunity so to do. So I believe... I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
On the point of the abuse of procedure inherent in this non-notification of those affected, is he aware that WASPI women are now seeking legal advice from Bindmans as to whether this is not improper and indeed an abusive procedure? Wouldn't that money be much better used for the government to settle this case which they disgracefully procrastinated over?
I'm grateful for that intervention because it's very pertinent and it does give the Minister an opportunity to find a solution. I'm not sure what the costs of a collective action potentially could be. HMRC was suggesting 2.4 million. I think the real figure is 3.5 million. If all of those cases of maladministration are found against the government, we could be looking at a huge settlement. And given that the Prime Minister seems to have discovered the magic money tree, then maybe a few leaves could be brought down to mitigate against those who are worst affected. Can I just say, Sir Edward, it's my intention in this new Parliament, I want to work with all members, irrespective of party, to secure justice for the WASPI campaigners. And as I mentioned before, the arithmetic's changed. It would have been difficult to secure meaningful changes to help women affected without the support of government in the last Parliament. However, we now have that opportunity. I've received the names of those members who signed the WASPI pledge, and I think that there are 20 Conservative and DUP members in that number. That's a significant number for people who are following the maths, and I see the government whips here. I'm confident that my right honourable friend for Stockton North will outline the opposition's position and the support Labour will offer to those women affected by these changes. However, in this Parliament, the extent and scope of any changes, transitional arrangements, bridging pensions or compensation depends upon those 20 members from the Conservative Party and the DUP. And I would say to those 20 members of Parliament, honourable and right honourable members, they hold the balance of power on this issue. So I would urge the government to take a pragmatic approach. I urge that to date, I'm concerned that to date the Department of Work and Pensions have failed to provide an adequate and substantive response to the letter that my right honourable friend raised from Bindmans, the legal representatives of the WASPI campaign, that has highlighted the issues of maladministration by the government.
The Honourable Gentleman is speaking for 15 minutes. As a courtesy to his colleagues, will he please come to his conclusion?
Okay. I shall come to a conclusion. I would urge the government to acknowledge their error, provide all of those affected with some level of compensation, and provide those worst affected, those waiting 6 years longer than they had planned before they receive their retirement pension, some support to bridge the gap between 60 and 66. And I will end, Sir Edward, with a quote from the DUP manifesto. And I must confess, in all my days, I never ever thought I would quote from the DUP manifesto. So this may be my one and only opportunity ever to do so. And this is what they said, that they would support an end to the unfair treatment of women pensioners. So alongside those Conservative MPs who signed the WASPI pledge, we have the numbers to change this policy. I would ask the Minister to take this opportunity, secures the changes needed, and provides dignity in retirement for all those women penalised by these changes.
Can we have order, please? Order. The question is that this House has considered the state pension age for women in view of the very large number of honourable members wishing to take part, and my intention to try and call as many as possible. I must now, I'm afraid, impose a 2-minute limit. Anne May.
Early in this debate, and I have 4,000 women affected by this, and I've met with them, as I'm sure many other honourable colleagues will as well. I'm going to have to rattle through this, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Lee. I'm sorry to not actually be eloquent, because I would like to be on their behalf. But it's a whole complex picture. Not only do my constituents feel they were not given adequate information about how to plan their future, but they also feel cast on the heap, so to speak, when they are now in the position of having to look for jobs. Their experience in the job centre has been abysmal. People who have been in senior positions are being given advice on how to dress and present themselves at interviews and update their CVs. There's nearly 0% unemployment in my constituency, so their chances of getting a job are pretty remote, and they're finding it incredibly dispiriting to have to take part in that procedure. I would only like to quote from Daphne. I won't give her second name, but she has been instrumental in bringing this to my attention in St Albans. What she says, and it would reflect on many women, and I am actually in that position as well of being a WASPI woman, is that generations ago did things differently. She started work at a very young age. She was only informed 2.5 years before she was due to retire in October 2012. And she's married to a man who's 5 years older than her. And as she said, this isn't how I plan to spend my retirement. Scraping around trying to get a job, being advised by people at the job centre who have absolutely no idea of how to get her a job, and to actually be feeling the sense of injustice that she was given so little time to plan. And I think that is the nub of it for the WASPI women, is they accept that there should be an equalisation in pension age, but what they don't accept is being given a matter of months to turn their lives around, to turn their future plans around with their spouses or partners, and to actually have some comfort in their retirement that they can live the lives that they thought they had planned for and made all the preparation for. And it is a fact that those letters did not arrive that should be desperately looked into by the Minister, and something should be done to redress the imbalance.
Jessica Morden.
To join other honourable members in speaking up for these women who've worked hard all their lives, working to a presumed retirement date, only to see the government move the goalposts at the last minute, giving them little or no notice, and as we've heard, causing real financial hardship. This is the first debate in this Parliament, but just the latest in a long line of debates, questions, lobbies calling on the government to right this wrong. And it's necessary now, because up till now there's been no positive messages from the government, no mention in the Tory manifesto, no mention in the Queen's speech. The WASPI women who I've spoken to clearly made their voice heard in the general election, lobbying candidates, voting for candidates who listened and committed to fight for this huge injustice. The government should not and cannot take these women for granted anymore. Their voice will be heard and needs to be heeded. Women who have sacrificed their own careers caring, been unable to take up suitable workplace pensions, often due to unequal pay in the past, and many, because of ill health, who are not able to work the extra years the government now expects of them. This is illustrated by a constituent who asked me to raise her case and sadly died recently. She had to give up work after 45 years, aged 62, after a long battle with cancer. In a demanding job, she just couldn't continue. This change meant she was denied over £38,000. She was unable to enjoy her retirement 60 and was very worried about the financial hardship this meant. This shows the real human impact of this government policy. This is just one voice, but I would ask the Minister to listen to the many thousands like her and work out there for a solution to end this hardship and right this wrong.
Tim Lawton.
Debate, as they did in so many of the debates we held in the last Parliament. I particularly welcome back some of the long-standing supporters of this campaign. I particularly welcome new conscripts to this campaign, and I particularly welcome long-standing members newly converted to this campaign, partly, I'm sure, by the fantastic campaigning efforts of the various WASPI campaigners during the general election, getting people to sign that pledge, and I pay tribute to them again. It's essential that we all keep united on this important campaign. And I speak as a co-chair of the WASPI all-party group, and I give the pledge, along with the Honourable Lady from Swansea, who co-chaired it with me. We will be reforming that group shortly to make sure your voices are heard loud and clear in this place until we get justice for those WASPI women. It is worth reminding ourselves, Sir Edward, that the state system, pension system is founded on the contributory principle. This is not a state benefit for which no prior commitment is involved. And yet this group of women who have been paying national insurance contributions over many years in good faith and have fulfilled their end of the deal face being short-changed retrospectively. That is the nub of this injustice. So there is an unfair burden on women born in the 1950s, bearing that burden disproportionately of all women. Poor communications, we've heard so much about before, were not made aware of what they were going to face. The promise of transitional arrangements that have still not materialised, despite various ministers saying they would. Sir Edward, this represents, in my view, a breach of trust with hundreds of thousands, indeed millions, of women who worked hard, did the right thing, did their bit all their lives. The problem is more widespread than we were ever led to believe. It threatens real hardship for many of our constituents now, not some stage in the future, absolutely now. This problem is not going to go away, Sir Edward. I hope with a new minister and a new Secretary of State, we can have a new start, a clean break, and recognise this injustice and do something about it at long last.
Colleen Fletcher.
The 1950s women have faced challenges and disadvantage throughout their working lives. These women, and I include myself in those, started work before the Equal Pay Act 1970 came into force and predated the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. They regularly experienced harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and they frequently had to resolve to accept low-paid, part-time jobs because flexible working was not then available to them. They are the group of women who, because of a lack of childcare provision and paternity leave, gave up work to raise children, which not only affected their personal occupational pension, if they were lucky enough to have one, I have to say, but also their future earnings capacity too. The government's decision to accelerate state pension age equalisation is the most recent affront to this group of women, who, despite facing such adversity, have contributed all of their working lives and deserve a decent retirement built on solid foundations of stability and certainty. Unfortunately, the gross unfairness of the government's decision, combined with their inability to properly communicate the changes that it introduced, has robbed this group of women of the capacity to plan their retirement with certainty and to make informed decisions, as well as access to the time needed to adjust to their new circumstances. The government must now act to address this intrinsic unfairness by introducing transitional arrangements for these women. Everyone agrees that the retirement age for the state pension should be the same for men and women. That is not the question. It is not equalisation that is so unfair. It is the pace of the changes and the way in which the government are bringing them in, along with the indifference shown towards those affected. This now needs to be resolved without delay.
Richard Graham.
Times previously, and it's unlikely that there will be much said today that is new. The Select Committee report in the last Parliament highlighted some of the issues which the WASPI campaigners themselves raised. Amongst those are the key problems of communication and the lessons that can be learnt from that. In particular, that all those who are going to be affected by future pension state age changes should be given much longer notice in advance, and that there needs to be a much better communications programme to make sure that no one has reason to say that they didn't know when their state pension would arrive. There are also the real issues of equality and European law, which have been overlooked by some people, in particular to do with the 1995 Act. And there are also real issues, sometimes underemphasised by some of my colleagues, about the costs of this to the DWP, estimated to be at around 30 billion, with a further cost to the Exchequer of around 8 billion on reduced tax and NI contributions. That is a completely different sum of money, for example, to the additional funding given to help mental health in Northern Ireland. If I am allowed to, Sir Edward, then I give way.
I'm very grateful. You referred earlier to the communications. How can it possibly be right that when I wrote to women in my constituency that I could identify might be affected, many of them wrote back and said this was the first time they'd ever been told by anybody? That's the injustice of the situation.
I understand.
This is a very strong issue, but I'm afraid it's a custom of the House that the public gallery have to remain silent. I apologise. Mr. Graham.
I understand the point he's making. That was covered in considerable detail in the Select Committee report, which was chaired by his own colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead. There are claims both ways on that. I suspect there were definitely people who did not know, but perhaps not quite as many as has been suggested. Let me now come on to the proposals made by the opposition parties. In the first debate in this very chamber some time ago, which was as well attended, the Honourable Member for Easton should know, as this one is, there were, at that time, I warned WASPI campaigners that they were in real danger of being led up the garden path by the Labour and the Scottish National Party. And I notice that in 2016, the Labour Party committed 860 million to increase pension credits. That was reduced in their manifesto to 300 million, alongside a line that said Labour is exploring optionals for further transitional protections. After 2.5 years, Sir Edward, I would have thought that they had come up with some result from their explorations, but none so far. And in terms of the Scottish National Party, who simply said in their manifesto, we will also continue to support the WASPI campaign, they now have the devolved powers in Scotland to give additional discretionary sums of money to those affected. Now, I won't take any further questions. There are many people who want to speak. So today, my strong recommendation to the Minister is that he's a new minister and he's capable, and I know he's looked at this issue, is to focus at what extra support he and the government can give to those women who are still in work longer than they otherwise expected to be so, and in particular to spell out more about what the government's strategy for, quote, fuller working lives, unquote, involves. Meanwhile, he has in his in-tray two important issues to look at which affect other pensioners, which is the fact that there are real issues for people who are getting net pay and not benefiting from their employers' contributions, and those people with less than the hurdle required to get the pension at all.
Time out, I'm afraid. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If I could just correct the honourable member from Gloucester. If he reads the Scotland Act, section 28, he will see the Scottish Government is prohibited from doing anything around pensions or relating to age. So, section 28, I would suggest. The key issue of this is about communication. The Pensions Committee said that people should have 15 years, and the government says, well, you did. It was in 1995. But the government wasted 14 of those years by not informing women. They only started to write to women in 2009, 1 year before the first batch of women would find that their pension age had changed. Many only discovered when they were informed of the second change in 2011 that actually they were being hit by a double whammy. The problem is, as I mentioned earlier, it is a matter of communication. Just an article in the Financial Times is not an acceptable way to inform women like me, born in the 50s, that our pension age is changing. HMRC and DWP can certainly find you when they want you. So I would have thought they could send a personal letter. And the idea that we would have to ask our pension age when for our whole lives we've known what it was is ridiculous. The government owes these women a duty of care. They have suffered the gender pay gap, they have raised children, they have cared for the sick, and now they should not be a giveaway.
The honourable member has to approach the microphone strictly under the rules of the House. He should be sitting before he stands. I know it's difficult, but he has to come near a microphone.
I'm sitting.
All right, I apologise, but make sure you speak to the microphone.
I'm very grateful. Isn't part of the real problem here that all those women who have given up much of their adult lives to caring responsibilities then face real discrimination in seeking work at this age and are therefore left in poverty in a totally unacceptable way?
I thank the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, for his intervention. But these women have also faced discrimination while they were working because they have been in poorly paid jobs. As was said by a member earlier, part-time or flexible working wasn't available. Women occupy the bulk of low-paid jobs. Women have faced and suffered 86% of all the austerity cuts since 2010. So these women have paid and paid and paid, and some of them are losing almost £50,000 of pension when they are moving from 60 to 66. This is utterly unjust. The government could correct it. They should sit down on a cross-party basis and work it out and deliver some justice, fairness and dignity for the WASPI women.
Adeline Moon.
Thank you, Sir Edward. This is a very simple question of justice. It's a simple question of fairness and righting a wrong that has been done to women of the 1950s generation. I was born in the 1950s, and for many of you in this room, you don't remember it. But women didn't work. We were told that we would have to rely on our husbands' pensions. Later on, when you did go into work, when there was an opportunity to do so, you were told, well, you're working part-time, you can't enter a private pension agreement. You didn't work, not because you didn't want to, but because there were no employment opportunities for working women. Some women couldn't actually be in teaching if you were married in the early 1950s. You had to give up work. We now have the situation that those same 1950s women, called, and I do find it quite offensive, the sandwich generation, we're now the ones who are looking after grandchildren. We're the ones looking after our elderly parents. And at the same time, are having to give up work because our pension isn't there. Too many women are now living in poverty. Too many women, when they can get work, are having to accept 0-hour contracts, temporary jobs, and low pay, no matter what their qualifications, no matter what their skills base. It is wrong that a generation of women have been treated in this way, ignored by government, not even communicated with. The contempt that that generation of women have had to cope with all of their working life has been exacerbated by this government. It is time for justice for the WASPI women.
To orders.
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for Easington for bringing forward this debate at a very convenient and appropriate time. Last October, I presented a petition signed by 2,249 Waveney residents in support of the WASPI campaign. At the same time, Waveney District Council unanimously, on a cross-party basis, endorsed that campaign. The general election campaign, knocking on doors, confirmed to me that this is a very real problem for many women facing real serious hardship, and it will not go away. The all-party parliamentary group, which will be reformed shortly, will, I'm sure, play its role in finding a solution. What I would ask, briefly, is the Minister, to whom I know well, is to consult, consider with his ministerial colleagues, and to come forward with proposals which can be the start of a process of finding a solution that is fair, fully considered and affordable. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Very concise. Right. Mary Glindon, then. Mary Glindon.
Thank you. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Lee, and I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this debate. There are 5,000 women in North Tyneside affected by the changes to state pension age, and many of them have contacted me about the acceleration of the state pension age for them. And it is a fact that women who did go into work in this age group went straight into work after leaving school. So by the time they reach the state pension age, they've already worked more than the 35 years expected for a full state pension, and will have at least 39 to 44 qualifying years, and have paid more than their fair share of contributions, but are losing at least 3 to 4 years of pension entitlement.
My honourable friend of
I will.
I'm very grateful. Would she also agree that those women who did not contract out of the state scheme but remained in it are disadvantaged against those who did contract out, in that often you can draw a pension early if it's a private pension that you contracted out to. You cannot draw your state pension early.
Yeah, I've nothing to add to that, yes, quite right. My point is that this is quite a saving for the Treasury, in fact. And one of my constituents who worked until she was in her late 50s and gave up a job to look after her father who had dementia, thought she could manage because she thought she was going to get a pension at 60, but unable to claim a pension. She found she was unable to claim a pension, and then she had poor health herself and was forced to claim ESA with the support of her GP. A claim was denied, and despite ill health, she now has to work 2 cleaning jobs to support herself. A disgrace. I feel both sorry and angry for the 5,000 women in North Tyneside and the other millions of women who have been cheated of their pension entitlement by both the coalition government and now this Tory government. And I hope the Minister will disagree with his predecessor, who claimed that going further than the government had already gone would not be justified. Our welfare state began on 5/7/48, so I say to the Minister, on 5/7/2015, a commitment by him of further transitional arrangements for these women would be a fitting birthday tribute to this great institution.
Julian Knight.
I did have a very long speech. That's now going to be a very, very short speech. I just want to make one particular point. Now, I was a personal finance journalist, write about pensions for about 15 years, and also my mother is one of those affected by these particular changes, and she was informed, but she found out it relatively late in that respect. So, and I also have many constituents as well in that regard. The point I'm really going to make here is that whereas I do accept that I genuinely believe that the government in the past, the 13 years, remember, of the Labour government that saw through over the majority of this, fell down on the job in terms of informing people directly as they should have done. There was some discussion in the personal finance press, because I know that because I used to write about it. But the realities were that Labour now, frankly, coming along and saying that, you know, that basically all is terrible with the Conservatives, whatever. You were in charge for 13 years during that period. No, I'm not going to give way, I'm afraid, short of time. However, the other point I would like to make is the fact that the current state pension arrangements as they are, frankly, are going to have to rise as well. And when we do meet these issues in the future, we're going to have to get this right. Because the reality is, the country is heading for an enormous black hole. The figures are frightening, absolutely frightening. And 30 billion here, 30 billion, people talk about that, but the realities are that if the opposition parties want to form a government in the future, they're going to have to, I'm afraid, come to the reality that the pension system in this country needs to continue to be reformed radically. And if they don't, just grandstanding and taking on policies and ignoring what their own errors were in the past is frankly not going to do any good whatsoever. Now, in 2003, we had the Turner Commission report. I'm sorry, I can't give way. I didn't do it for the Honourable Lady. So finally, I said the 2003 Commission report, 2003, was born out of cross-party consensus on pensions. That has broken down. We need a little bit more cooperative work going forward so it doesn't happen again.
Graham Jones.
Thank you, I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, Member for Easington, for securing once again a debate on this really important matter. And as he has already stated, the reasons why this policy is so unfair: the lack of adequate notice given to the 3.5 million WASPI women, the lack of opportunity to make contingent plans for the future in the face of such injustice. I too have over 4,000 women affected in Haslingden and Hyndburn, and I want to relay some of...
Sir Edward. Catherine Vernon is one of over 4,000 constituents in Weaver Vale affected, just the honourable member in the back. And of course, the only garden path they led me up in the WASPI campaign. In fact, they led me up the path to election victory. So I removed one of your own, the Tory member for Weaver Vale. I mean, do the maths there. It was 806 was the majority in Weaver Vale of the former MP. I had 4,400 very, very powerful WASPI women. I'd like to thank them in terms of their campaign. Continue shaking this place up until you get justice. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend. I think that there are a number of people that want to raise concerns. This debate has been thrashed, so I, Sir Edward, just want to turn to some of the comments that my constituents have made to me. Jennifer Smith, aged 63, works as a nurse on night shifts, and she does not see why she should run around an extremely busy ward while her pension is being moved back. Kath Talbot wrote to me, also in her 60s, has described the change as a 6-year sentence, and says it's heartbreaking to watch your plans go up in smoke because you have to use your savings to get by. Elaine Walker, aged 62, has worked all her life but is now disabled. On top of the changes to pensions, the government has also cut her benefits. Joanna Fraser, aged 62, worries about an uncertain future for her and her friends who simply can't cope with further demoralisation after over 45 years of hard work. And as Sylvia Cotton wrote to me, aged 63, is undergoing chemotherapy and worries whether she will receive her pension if she stops work for good. Helen Grace wrote to me, and she's now had to take medication because of the stress of this change. She works in early years, but she said she wouldn't choose that career if she had known about the pension equalisation. She and Julia Sanderson both want to emphasise the problems of means testing and the so-called transitional arrangements of 18 months. Helen Bruin says that the very least the government could do is have a look at the effect it is having on people in their 50s. Thousands of women are suffering like they are. And finally, with time short, and I want to allow some other people to come in, Wendy Critchley wrote to me, and she points out that the 1950s women were brought up in an age where working hard was encouraged. And how has it ended up like this injustice? So I would say to the Minister, the government needs to step up now and implement some clear transitional arrangements for these women that at least in some way remedies the situation that they face. Their financial situation is insecure now, and the government needs to recognise that.
Yeah. Well done. Justin Matters.
Thank you, Sir Edward. As other members have referred to already, we've had many debates on this subject previously, so it would be fair to say that in terms of raising the profile of this issue, the WASPI campaign has been a success. But we know the only measure of success that honourable members and campaigners will judge this by is a change in government policy. And, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have time. I'm going to let other people come in. Go on then.
Isn't it the case that because of the arithmetic of this Parliament, the government is going to have to come forward with a proposal? That is absolutely clear. The only question is whether it's a derisory one. And doesn't the Minister, when he responds to the debate today, need to understand that point before he comes forward with his inevitable offer sometime in the near future?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he's right, there is an arithmetical inevitability about this now, and I think that is tribute to the WASPI campaigners for the way they have focused on people who've stood for Parliament and gained their support. And I think, given the timescales and the people we're talking about here, the sooner something comes forward, the better, because these women cannot afford to wait another 5 years to the end of this Parliament. So I do urge the Minister, as my honourable friend has suggested, to come up with proposals sooner rather than later. And as we've seen following the election, ministers have changed their mind mind on a whole range of other matters. So why should the WASPI campaign be any different? Anyone who's spoken to the campaigners cannot but help be moved by the very compelling case that they make. I've met many of them, and they tell me about they've been individually affected. Many have received little or no notice at all about changes to their pension age, forcing them to reconsider retirement plans, or worse still, rejoin the jobs market sometime after they thought they would not need to work again. I've heard from constituents who volunteered to take redundancy to save the jobs of younger colleagues on the false assumption they would receive their pension at an earlier date than they will do. They deserve better. So it's no longer acceptable when we hear the government to say that change is unaffordable. As we've heard from various members already today, we only need to look at what has happened in Northern Ireland in the last week to know that where there is a political imperative, money can be found. And what about the costs in unintended... I'm not going to give away any more. What about the cost in unintended consequences? I've had a number of constituents tell me that they find the position they find themselves in now has had a detrimental impact on their mental health. That has a cost to the public purse as well. But if the moral and financial arguments aren't persuasive, please reflect upon this, Minister. Please reflect on the message that this sends out, not just to the WASPI women, but to everyone. The state pension is part of the social contract that government has with the people of this country. An important part of that states the guarantee that people, if they pay their taxes, they will be looked after in their old age or when they fall ill or when they otherwise have misfortune. If people do not trust the government to deliver on that promise, then we are heading down a road that I believe we will all regret.
Sammy Wilson.
First of all, can I make quite clear our commitment that's already been read from our manifesto, and I would suggest to the proposer that he might find more enlightenment and balance in our manifesto than he does in his own manifesto. But our manifesto has committed us to continuing this campaign and to continuing giving the support that we afforded in the last Parliament, and we'll continue to do that. And this is an issue of fairness. People have already indicated that the main problem here, not that pension age shouldn't be changed, but when it is changed, people ought to know that the circumstances have changed. And the government, and it's not only one government, in fact, a whole range of parties, and perhaps it doesn't do any good to simply point fingers here today, but the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives and the Labour Party have all been in power during the time when information should have been given and wasn't given. And as a result, of course, many people find that their pension age has been substantially changed and they're left without any provision for their immediate needs. We're not wedded to any particular outcome of this. And I think that, first of all, we do have to recognise that there are a number of fiscal restraints. Having said that, there have been a number of suggestions put forward, all of which would help to address the problems which are being faced by those who, first of all, face an immediate loss of income and, secondly, have no provision made for filling the gap which has been caused. And therefore, during this Parliament, we will work with the government and use whatever influence, however minimal or maximum that may be, to try and get a solution which, and it will inevitably, I think, have to be cross-party, but a solution which helps to address this particular problem faced by people who had to bore no responsibility for their problems themselves, but had it foisted upon them.
The WASPI campaign has been hugely effective, and I congratulate them. Especially effective in my constituency and with my own party, and I should say that we are steadfast in our support. As we've heard, millions of women have worked hard and have had their lives totally disrupted. They are angry, and they're not going away either. Often they face unemployment with little hope of getting a job, or getting a job which is well paid in a constituency like mine, which is a low pay area, and that is a very poor reward for many years of long years of work. We do not oppose equalisation of the state pension age, of course. Everyone says that. It is the way that it has been done which shows such disregard and indeed contempt. The Minister will know that it has long been the case that it is argued on all sides that such profound changes as this require at least 10 years of notice. For example, the House will be interested to know that most recently the Critland Review, published just in March this year, recommends raising the age to 68
over a 2-year period between 2037 and 2039. That's 20 years hence. I do give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he is completely right to point out the despicable way in which women born in the 1950s have been treated. Would he also agree with me that women in Wales are disproportionately affected by the administration of these changes?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that point. And it's not just in Wales, but it's in other deprived areas of the UK, in the North East, in the South West. The government claims to be making these changes in response to the increase in life expectancy. Well, life expectancy varies significantly from region to region. Wales will be particularly hit. A newborn baby could expect to live to the age of 87 in parts of England, but just to 76 in parts of Wales. Payments in might be equal, but payments out vary enormously. Now, I urge the government, finally, to phase in transitional arrangements for the state pension arrangements for all WASPI women. This requires, I think, a bridging pension and compensation for those affected to cover the period between the age of 60 and the new age. The voices of women so badly treated must be heard and they must be heeded. Otherwise, it might seem that the Minister believes that accepting unfairness and being quiet is just a girl's job.
It is very warm, so gentlemen may remove their jackets if they want, but perhaps if they remove their jacket, they might leave their tie on. We don't want to be... They want to leave something on. Caroline Harris.
Today's attendance is testimony to the depth of feeling on this issue, and the Minister will know just how passionate I and my colleagues are about this grave injustice. I'm sure his predecessor has left him a health warning as to my personal passion on this issue. And I need say nothing more about the issue because colleagues are saying it for me. But given my own personal passion, I feel I'm compelled to say that this government has betrayed these women. They've stolen their security and they've shattered their dreams. Without time to prepare and make the necessary alternative arrangements, many women born in the 1950s have been left in financial despair. And these women are not asking for special treatment, they are merely asking for respect and fair play. In the recent general election, all of my Labour candidate colleagues, most opposition and indeed some Conservative candidates signed the WASPI pledge. I believe I saw many Twitter accounts, including that from the honourable member from North Devon, who showed his support for the WASPI campaign. And I applaud you all for taking that brave move. So now I say to this government, now is the time to respect your colleagues, if not the WASPI women, and do the right thing. These women have suffered for too long. The injustice must stop now. It cannot be allowed to continue any longer.
Mr. Gibson.
WASPI women are angry, and the government is mistaken if it thinks, as I suspect it has been thinking up to this point, that if it holds firm, these women will get bored. They will be broken or beaten in the face of intransigence and they will give up. They will not give up. And even if they wanted to give up, they are unable to give up. This is not pin money. This is money to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. It's about being paid the pension to which they are entitled in order to have some kind of dignity in their retirement. They're not asking for a handout. They're not even asking for a hand up. They are asking for what is rightfully theirs and that which they should be able to expect. They are angry and they have every right to be. Any fair-minded person who knows anything about this issue surely must be angry on their behalf. The delay to their pensions effectively deprives them of potentially tens of thousands of pounds. This is a travesty and it must be addressed. And let's not forget, an attack on these women's pensions is an attack ultimately on all our pensions. A contract between the governed and the governing lies in tatters. And I would say this to the Minister today. If the Minister today feels that the government has painted itself into a corner and that retreat is difficult, I say this. There is courage and there is strength in admitting you are wrong. There is courage and there is strength in doing the right thing and giving these women their due. Not because the parliamentary arithmetic demands it, but because it is the right thing to do. I urge the Minister today to make the right choice, to right this terrible wrong. Pay these women what they are owed so that we can all start to have a serious and mature, grown-up discussion about the future of state pensions, to which no one is opposed. No one is opposed to the equalisation of state pensions. That is the way forward, and I urge the Minister to today start walking that path.
Laura Pidcock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for allowing me to speak in this debate. I'm yet to meet anybody who does not agree that the position of these women and the position that they're in is terrible, and the failings fall with the government and not the individuals in question. I think it would be extremely hard to dispute that there was not enough energy or resources put in place to inform the women of the changes in enough time for them to prepare psychologically to comprehend what the rest of their working life and then their retirement plans would be. Approximately 5,000 of these women live in North West Durham, and I've not met many of them who have been able to save, and they are now living in hardship. What an indignity that is after serving their communities through their labour for so many years, to end their lives in poverty. I don't think it's disputed, Chair, that there was not adequate notification. The DWP's own research says that 6 out of 10 women expected to reach their state pension age earlier than they will or will.
Thank you, I'm grateful for that. In Lee, and you're right on that point, we have 4,000 WASPI women, and they've had to set up their own support group in order to support other women who are going through and are affected by these changes. So there's the initial awareness that they've not been made aware of, and it's still ongoing. So you're right to point that out. Thank you.
I think my honourable friend is right in saying that when the fails, the people will organise. I think that I have witnessed firsthand that my own mum only found out about her pension changes because of the WASPI campaign, and I saw her disappointment, her worry, her anger, that after working from the age of 13, she then had to wait more and more and was robbed of nearly £40,000. I think for these women who have not had enough time to prepare, who have had inadequate correspondence from the DWP, and who through no fault of their own have ended up in poverty, the right thing to do is to compensate those who have already reached state pension age and to provide a bridging pension for those who have not. In humble recognition, as previous members have said, that this is not a benefit, but this is what is rightfully theirs. And as others have recognised, in the last couple of weeks we've seen that when there's a political will, money can be found very quickly to remedy a problem. And I urge the government to apply the same urgency to this situation. There are many, many lessons that will be learned from this situation, but there is no justification for not putting this right. I want pension justice for those women now.
What a difference a few months can make in politics. At the start of June, the Prime Minister told us there's no magical money tree. Yet at the start of July, the UK government could magically find £1 billion to save Theresa May's career, at least for the short term. Of course, when things don't go to plan, it's helpful to have a safety net to fall back on. It's a luxury that many women would not have, given the UK government have unfairly and unexpectedly changed their pension rights. Often these women are forced to accept lower paid and insecure work because some employers are unwilling to take on workers who are close to retirement age. The resulting financial hardship has forced some women to sell their homes, while others have developed or aggravated long-term health conditions due to the stress and anxiety of their situation. Too many are still facing an uncertain future. In my own constituency of Inverclyde, it's estimated that 3,900 women have been affected. Local campaigners, such as Elizabeth McCorry, have done a tremendous job in making sure that this issue is not brushed aside by this government. If it were not for our local WASPI campaign, there would be many more women caught out by the pension changes, some of whom would stand to lose £35,000 over 5 years. So if the UK government can find £1 billion to help save the Prime Minister, why have they not devoted one single penny to help the 2.6 million women affected by unfair pension changes? There are solutions available and they are affordable. An independent report commissioned by the SNP outlined 5 options that the UK government could take in order to mitigate the impact of the changes. The research found for £8 billion over 5 years, we could return to the original timetable and set out the 1995 Pensions Act. The report also concluded that money could come from the National Insurance Fund, which is predicted to have a surplus of £30 billion by 2017-18. The women of the WASPI campaigned and have fulfilled their part of the bargain by being productive citizens, some of whom have worked since they were 15 years of age. Now it's time for the UK government to honour their side of this contract.
Julie Cooper.
Thank you.
Sir Edward. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for bringing another debate on this really important issue. And in the very short time available to me, I want to make a couple of points. Firstly, this is a dangerous precedent that the government has set by breaking a contract with the people of this country. And what does it say going forward? These women have been cheated. They're not... I resent the implication, I'm sure they do too, that the government cannot afford this, that it is government spending that's being asked for. This is a contract that these women entered into the government in good faith. They paid in, they worked hard and they paid. And they reasonably expected that at age 60 they could collect their pension. And as has been said by many, there was no desire to fight the equalisation, but there is a right of fair notice. And many of my constituents found out, some of them through their own volition, only 6 weeks before their 60th birthday, that they were not able to retire at 60 as they'd been expected. And this isn't about just fancying putting their feet up and having to work a bit longer. These are many women who are having to continue to work in physically demanding jobs when they're clearly not fit to do so. I've Nurse Julie in my constituency who relies on her own income to support herself. 47 years she's worked in the NHS. Recent ill health meant that she thought she could just stagger on in what is a very physical role, means that she now has to work another 3 years. She got no notice whatsoever.
Very brief. I'm really grateful for you giving way. What really is crystal clear in the debate today is the fact that this is a state error. And yet, do you agree with me that it is just women that are having to pay for the state fault?
Yeah. I absolutely agree with my colleague here. Women cannot pay the price of a financial deficit in this country. These women who have given and worked hard deserve to get what they are entitled to. I was speaking to another woman in the constituency who works in a foundry doing heavy physical work. She says she drags herself to the bus station at the end of the day, and when she gets home she's in bed at 7:30 so she can get to work the day after. The only way she thought she could stagger on another 18 months till she's 60, now finding she's got to work extra years. It is not an option to her. Not working is not something that she can choose to not do. She's not qualified to do anything else. Who at 61 is going to employ her to do anything now? It is definitely unacceptable. These women were not notified. The very least the government can do is to make some transitional arrangements so there can at least be a semblance of fairness to allow them to continue into some sort of dignity in retirement. Thank you.
Order, order. Well, I'm grateful for your cooperation. I'm sorry for the short time limits, but I think we have got everybody in. We'll now pass to the wind-ups. Maori Black.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I was going to also congratulate the honourable member for bringing this debate to the House again. But I find myself actually wishing that he hadn't, because I cannot believe that we are still here, still debating this issue. I am absolutely scunnered with banging on about the injustice to this group of women, and the fact that we are having to have another debate is an absolute disgrace, and it says a lot for the government and what their priorities have been. Now, it's now at the stage where these debates are actually almost scripted for me. I know exactly what's going to come back from the government benches, and like most people in here, I know what I'm going to say already. We've heard the argument from the government that, well, the 95 Act gave the 15 years notice. That's exactly what the Turner Commission had recommended, so what is the problem? So let me say it as clear as possible. It was that nobody knew about these changes. The first letters weren't sent out until 2009. That's 14 years after the changes. Now, just to put that into context, I've only been alive 8 years longer than that. That's 14 years where consecutive governments sat on their backside and did nothing, and are now complaining that women are quite rightly angry that they never knew about these changes. And the thing is that this isn't even information that the government have told us with their hands in the air saying, you're right, sorry, we got that a wee bit wrong. This has been from the work from these hard-working women behind me with FOI requests, with constant letters to government. They have been nothing but obstructive and downright stubborn the whole way through this entire campaign and since this has been raised again. So much so that the SNP actually went away and we did our own work. We used our own money, commissioned our own report, which showed that this could plausibly be sorted. This could be at least amended a wee bit, and all it would take is £8 billion spread across 5 years. Now, £8 billion is a substantial amount of money, but to refer to the honourable member from Gloucestershire, who I had the pleasure of serving on committee with, the idea that the government is genuinely going to stand in front of all of these members today and say we can't afford it is quite frankly laughable. Absolutely laughable when it's been pointed out so many times. We can find £1 billion for a deal to cling on to power, but we can't find the money to give women the pensions that they're due. And yes, there you go.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. I know she's a very reasonable person. Let's see if we can help the government. We know that it's the case that the National Insurance Fund is sitting at a surplus of £30 billion. And let's just lay the myth that there's a black hole, because the government actuarial department's own figures suggest that fund's going to remain into surplus until at least the mid-2030s. So can we not just suggest to the government, use that surplus, women have paid into it, let's make sure they get their pension and let's do it today.
Not surprisingly, I agree with that statement. But I think it's also worth mentioning, though, that I heard some muttering there from the Conservative benches about how that's a lot of rubbish. Well, let me just say this. If that is a lot of rubbish in your heads, then bring your plans forward. You don't get to criticise other parties' plans when you've not even bothered coming up with some of your own. Now, and like I say, this is almost scripted because I know that the Minister is going to mention at some point, we did look at this in 2011 and we did make the concessions at the time. I guarantee the Minister will say that. So let my reply be this. That is not how the world works. That's not how society works. If your citizens are coming to you with a problem which, by the way, is time-sensitive, are coming to you and saying, this still isn't working, then it is the job of government to listen. It's not the job of government to look back and go, oh, we talked about that a couple of years ago, so I'm afraid there's no movement there whatsoever. Because if that is the case, then I'm looking forward to the next time the Army needs new funds. I'm looking forward to the next time this Parliament needs done up, all of these things. So this idea that we can't afford it is ridiculous. Now, fundamentally, the worst part of this whole issue is that these women are targeted. The government like to sit back and act as though these women are just unfortunate casualties of austerity. It's, look, our hands are tied, we can't do anything. That's not the case. They are targeted. These are women who have suffered pay inequality all their lives. They've suffered social inequality all their lives. And we even heard earlier on from an honourable member that they were told to use their husband's pensions. Well, society has changed a lot since then. What are we doing for these women now? And what about lesbian couples as well? What about women who are in equal marriages with other women? Are they just expected to bear the brunt? It's not even a double whammy, it's a quadruple whammy by this point. So I'm amazed that I feel the need that I have to point this out. These women are blameless. They are guilty of nothing. They have done nothing wrong other than, for instance, not reading the Financial Times back pages in 1995. The only other two things that they are guilty of is being born in the 50s and the fact that they are women. The government doesn't get to plead that this is all in the name of equality, because see, when it is only women that are suffering under your definition of equality, I think it's time you have to reassess what your definition is. So fundamentally, a government should be looking after its people. When your people are coming to you saying that there's a problem, it's your job to fix it. Now, let me just put a little bit of reality into this. I got an email today from a woman, a WASPI woman. I can't remember where she's from. It was somewhere in England. And she was telling us that her friend committed suicide after the general election result because she could not face what was going to happen to her. Citizens committing suicide over an issue that could be solved like that, an issue that the government could do a U-turn on at any given moment. So when the government manages to fork out a magical £1 billion to cling on to power, well, first of all, you must really want the job of being the one that has to fix these things. But second of all, you do not get to claim that money is the reason you can't help when you can find £1 billion for self-interest. Now, the government quite rightly dropped their manifesto pension plans I think 2 of them in total, because they've seen how damaging, unworkable and unpopular they would be. Now, that was wise for the government to do that, and in actual fact, I have a bit of respect for them to be able to go, aye, we got that wrong, guys, so we're pulling back, we're listening to you. So what I would say, for hopefully the last time, just drop one more plan. Realise that this is cross-party, this is across different backgrounds, different areas. This is people's mothers, this is your aunties, this is people's sisters and cousins. So please, can we do the right thing, do the job of government and fix the problem and start looking after your people?
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you to my honourable friend, a North East colleague, North East England colleague that is, the member for Easington, for securing the debate, and to everybody who has contributed this afternoon. And speaking of North East colleagues, I'd also like to congratulate the honourable member for Hexham on his promotion to Pensions Minister. It appears his jockeying for position in the political world has finally paid off. I was pleased to have a good and even friendly working relationship with his predecessor, the honourable member for Watford, and hope for the same with him. And we can start that right here with a friendly offer from this side to work together across the House to deliver much fairer transition arrangements for the much wronged 1950s born women who saw their pension age accelerated by several years with little or no notice. And the Minister is in a very strong position to deliver change. I believe all of us on this side, including the government's allies in the DUP, back the 50 women's born women's cause. My honourable friend spoke of the 20 Conservative and DUP members who signed the WASPI pledge, but it gets even better. There are 37 MPs on the government benches who have supported the WASPI campaign, either through membership of the all-party parliamentary group or through election pledges. Others have done so today. Enough to provide a majority in the House of those who want to see action taken to alleviate the difficulty faced by the most vulnerable women now in their 60s. I'm sure that each and every one of those members will want to report back to their constituents that they've fulfilled their promises. It's quite a list, and I'd love to share it with the Minister if he wants it. I've spoken for the official opposition on the matter of 50s-born women more than half a dozen times since I accepted my role 9 months ago, with other parties throwing their weight behind some form of support for the women who have been affected by these changes. But still, perhaps just until today, the government have simply stuck their collective heads in the sand. Yes, we now have a new Secretary of State, a new Pensions Minister, and as has already been said, even our new PPS, the Honourable Member for North Devon, is a declared WASPI supporter, having signed one of WASPI's pledges to, quote, do all he can to work for a solution if elected. He couldn't be better placed to influence change for the better. Perhaps now the government will take positive action and introduce new measures to reduce the strain on the most vulnerable women and men who have been affected by these increases in the state pension age. I've heard from numerous women affected by these changes over the months and heard their stories of the desperation and fear about how they're going to cope now that they have to wait even longer for their state pension. Does the new Minister understand how difficult it is for a woman in her 60s to retrain and gain employment? The job market and skills needed in the workplace today are in a very different world to that of 40 years ago. What we have is a system that doesn't help older people retrain and get back into meaningful employment, a welfare system being torn to pieces, disabled people being humiliated through repetitive assessments, and now a state pension that's becoming increasingly difficult to access. Once again, it is Labour and others that are standing up for the vulnerable. It is Labour calling out the injustice that ordinary people are facing, and it's Labour that is the loudest voice demanding action. I know what the Conservatives are doing. They're literally trying to ignore the issue in the hope that the years will pass, the number of women affected by this measure will drop, and they will get away with leaving older people to struggle for many years to come. We heard during the election that there isn't a magic money tree, and others have referred to it. But whenever the government needs funds to support its own aims, they find it. There is no magic money tree, but they found that £1 billion others have referred to secure their deal with the DUP to keep Theresa May in number 10. And that's just an upfront cost. The DUP will be back for more, and Northern Ireland will get the priority investment that areas in the rest of the country also desperately need. Whilst I'd never recommend selling out to the Tories, just as the Lib Dems did in 2010, but I can understand our 10 DUP colleagues striving to do the best for their communities with their £1 billion deal. I am sure there are many other MPs who have wondered what they could do to help their constituency if they had their own £100 million magic money tree. But it shouldn't be about one versus the other. You must make investment where it's needed and protect the most vulnerable. And just as communities in Northern Ireland and elsewhere need a lifeline, so do the 50s-born women, many of whom are destitute. The Labour Party have laid out our approach to reducing the strain on vulnerable and struggling women, which is to extend pension credit to those who are due to retire before the pension increase, which would alleviate the toughest circumstances and restore the faith and dignity that many have felt they've lost. Extending pension credit would provide support worth up to £155 per week for 500,000 of the most vulnerable women that have been affected by the increase in the state pension age. We're continuing to look at alternatives and other ways to ensure that those who need support receive it. But we need the government to get on board and work with us. If the Minister would like a conversation about how we can deliver a cross-party approach to secure fair transitional arrangements for the most vulnerable 50s-born women, I'll be pleased to meet him. The general election result delivered a verdict that the Conservatives no longer has the full confidence of the country to govern. This strengthens the case for a joint approach in this case. So I have a number of questions for the Minister. Has he had any discussions with the new Secretary of State about the plight of the 50s-born women? Do they accept that there were many women who had little, if any, notice of the change in their pension age and that they ought to be recompensed in some way? Will he and the Secretary of State agree at least to a review and then change their policy and offer at least some of the most vulnerable women, or all the most vulnerable women, something to get by on? Because that's what it's about, getting by on. Now, I know previous ministers, WMP ministers, wanted to help these women, but they had the Treasury doors slammed shut in their faces. I hope in these very different days of unstable government, the Minister will now be able to assure the House, including those 37 members of his own party, that he takes this matter seriously. They'll work with us and others to deliver a fair and meaningful solution to this problem. But above all, win some friends and make himself the government champion for these very wronged women.
We are from differing sides of the political fence, but my colleague from Easington and I are united by one key thing. We have both beaten cancer. So I would like to start by saying how pleased I am to see my fellow tumour survivor back in his place. I wish him well with his future treatment. And he can imagine the joy I had when on day 3 of my new job, as being the new Minister for Pension and Financial Security, and Financial Inclusion, I should say, I was told that he had secured a debate on women's state pension. It's the first debate that I would have to answer here in this House. Not yet, no, I'm not going to. All of us here, as constituency MPs, have met with women who have been affected by the state pension age rises. I've met with them ever since my election as the Member of Parliament in 2010 for Hexham, both during the passage of the 2011 bill and whether they are or are not affiliated to the WASPI campaign. I have seen them in and out of my surgeries, like all colleagues here have done, and like many have answered correspondence on the issue. I make it clear that I will be delighted to meet with the all-party group when it is reformed, as I'm sure it will be, and be in a position to sit down with them and discuss their ongoing situations. The Honourable Lady for Paisley and South Renfrewshire, made the point that she expected me to only speak about the 95 Act, the 2011 Act, all the transition arrangements, etc. I accept, and she will understand, I have to make the case on those matters, not least because of what has been said there. But I actually want to do this debate in a different way, because I want to say two things at the very outset. If there are individual members of Parliament who have specific cases where they feel that their individual constituents are affected by state pension age changes and find themselves in financial hardship, whether they are people who have to reduce their hours because of sickness, disability or caring responsibility, I and the London DW team will look into these individual cases, and if members pass them on to us, we will do what we can to provide assistance, whether it is understanding of the availability of carers allowance, housing benefit, tax credits, income support, ESA and other benefits. But the essence of what I want to address the House on is this, that it is the case, no, I won't, it is the case that it is not the government's position that they are going to make further concessions to those affected by the 95 or the 2011 Act. But their fundamental point, and the point I really wish to address to the Honourable Lady, is this. I suggest there is a massive amount that this government has done on a progressive basis to get people back into employment or retraining in their pre-pension years. I am going to list those matters. So we have created, firstly, and now extended our network of older claimant champions into all 34 Job Centre Plus districts in the country. The champions work with Job Centre work coaches to provide advice and best practice on skills provisions, digital and social support, and job support in circumstances where it then leads into the fuller working lives strategy, which was issued by the government on a cross-government basis in February of this year. Secondly, we have committed massively to lifelong learning. The reality is over 200,000 people over 60 have entered further education since 2014 and 2015 year.
Order. Everybody else is heard in silence, so please.
Thirdly, we have also extended apprenticeship opportunities as one of the best routes to skilled employment for people of all ages and gender. Such apprenticeships in England, for example, in 2014 to 2015, are 12% of the starting apprenticeships were for those aged 45. And in 2017, in 2017, I'm going to set out these matters. Please bear with me. In 2017, in the budget, the Chancellor allocated £5 million to increase the number of returnship schemes. We are working with employers across the public and private sector to understand how returners can be supported back into permanent employment, building on the successful examples run by companies such as Centrica. Last year, and the point I'm trying to make, I realise that it is not going down well, but the point I'm trying to make is that the government is actually doing a significant amount to address the individual difficulties for those persons attempting to enter the labour market. So last year, the government appointed Andy Briggs, CEO of Aviva, as the dedicated business champion for older workers to spearhead work with employers on a business-to-business basis. I met with Mr. Briggs 2 days ago. He is clearly passionate about his mission to persuade employers to increase the number of older workers they employ by 12% by 2022.
The Minister is entitled to give way or not. Point of order.
I'm struggling to hear the debate. Did the Minister just say that women aged 64 could go on an apprenticeship course? I couldn't hear because of the noise. Perhaps he could clarify that.
The honourable gentleman is very experienced. He knows that's not for me. Minister.
In May 2017, Mr. Briggs launched the Commit and Publish campaign, challenging employers to monitor the age of their workforce and publish figures by the end of 2017. A significant number of companies have already bought into this, including Aviva, Barclays and the Co-op. I can assure colleagues that I will be assisting Mr. Briggs and pursuing this campaign with all the rigour that I brought to my campaign for the living wage to be introduced. And in February 2017, the Fuller Working Lives strategy was launched on a cross-party basis. I urge colleagues to read it because the assertion was made in this debate, if we are frank, that there is nothing that the government is doing to try and encourage persons who are prior to pension age into employment. There are a number of different matters which I have set out, and it is particularly set out in the Fuller Working Lives strategy. I'm not giving away, because I have a lot of points to make. So, and in... This strategy aims to increase the retention, retraining and recruitment of older workers and bring about a change in the perceptions and attitudes of employers, which is surely something that we would all endorse and wish for. We know that many people approaching state pension age want to continue working or would like to be in work, and we have changed the law that the default retirement age has been abolished, so it has been abolished. I do urge colleagues to read this. The situation in relation to the 1995 Act, I do now wish to address, because it is the case that after extensive debate, the 1995 Act changed the 55-year-old status quo by equalising pension ages for men and women aged at 65, with this change to take place between 2010 and 2020, depending on age. That parliamentary statute was debated at length, and the changes were then the subject of widespread advertising, debate, leaflets, letters, and 16 million state pension forecasts. I am not here to criticise the 95 to 97 Conservative government, nor to criticise the 97 to 2010 government, because I suggest that they made real efforts to communicate the change that had been passed in 1995 by Parliament. I rely in support upon that of what the Honourable Gentleman for Easington himself said, that when he wrote in his blog in June 2016, and I have a copy here, that the timescales were such from the 95 Act that they gave sufficient time for people to plan for their new circumstances, and legislation was already in place that would have seen the equalised state pension age rise in gradual stages. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I think everyone's agreed that 15 years is enough time. The issue was notice, that the individuals weren't given notice. That was the issue I was trying to highlight in my blog.
With great respect to the Honourable Gentleman, the whole thrust of what he said in June 2016 was that there was no objection to the 1995 Act due to the passage of time. He has now changed that position. All I am doing is pointing out that the 95 Act had a 15-year time limit, and he knows full well that that is the case, that that's what his position was at that time. 16 years later, the coalition government changed the approach in the 2011 Pensions Act. And this is in a context, I suggest, where the reality is that it is clear that the impact of the post-war baby boom years are still being felt. The number of pensioners is going up dramatically. Notwithstanding any of the changes by the 95 and the 2011 Act, there will be around 25% more pensioners in 2050 than there are today. That is an extra 4.5 million extra pensioners than we have now. And it is the case that life expectancy has increased massively. In 1940, government policy making indicated a retirement age at 60, and our forebears looked at a life expectancy of 70 years and 10. Those days are long gone. A girl born today has an average life expectancy of 93. These changes in these particular life expectancy ages is significant, and the reality cannot be ignored. And it is not ignored, and is set out in greater detail in the Cridland report going forward, which looks at the future situation in relation to long-term pension ages changes. I have a minute and a half to finish, so I will culminate on this. In 2011, due to these changes, there was extensive debate in this House of Commons. It was the situation that it was debated on a number of occasions between February and November 2011 in both the Commons and the Lords. Subsequently, the DWP and the coalition government made efforts to notify, with 5 million letters sent out to those affected, and people were provided with a range of information in order for their individuals to be aware of their state pension age. I want to make 3 final points. In relation to the transitional provisions, it is the case that the position was very different in the original 2011 Act. And following extensive parliamentary debates, both in the Commons and in the Lords, that Act was changed such that the 2011 Pensions Act meant that no woman affected by the 2011 Act would have to wait more than 18 months from the date that they might have been expected their pension, and for some, the changes are much less. I would also make the point that the new state pension, introduced in 2016, is better and much more generous for many women than that which existed under the old systems. But in conclusion, Sir Edward, congratulate my honourable friend for securing the debate. It is not the government's proposal that they would repeal or ameliorate the 1995 or 2011 Act, but I do accept that the government must do all we can to assist everyone affected into retraining and employment and provide support if that is not possible. The commitment to provide support is clear, unequivocal and ongoing. Thank you.
Order.
And on all sides who have attended the debate and spoken with such passion on behalf of WASPI women. In defence of the Minister, who is a good and honourable man, I hope he'll have a chance to reflect on the arguments that have been made and the passions that are running highly and apply the principles of natural justice to the women affected by these changes. As a nation, we owe a debt of honour to the WASPI women who've paid their contributions, who are not looking for apprenticeships at 64. They're looking for some recognition of their contribution, sometimes over 44, 45 years and more, and many of whom are now in ill health. So please, discharge your responsibilities, Minister, otherwise the people may discharge this government.
Order. I have to put this question now. The question is that this House has considered the state pension age for women. As many of that opinion say aye. Minister? Contrary, no. No. Sorry. The noes have it. The noes have it. Order, order. Good. Sorry, I thought you wanted me to read out that text.
You do. They should have kept shouting aye. That was a strong one.
Good. Yeah, I think yours will be altogether quiet.
Order, order. Can I ask colleagues to leave quietly so that time is not left by the mover of the next debate? Frank Field to move the motion.
Madam Chairman, I'm immensely pleased to speak in this debate under your chairmanship, and I hope the Minister could be more accommodating to this issue than his colleague was in the previous debate. And indeed, I'm going to begin by buttering him up, if I may, but realising there's only a limit to what buttering up will do in the House of Commons, and particularly against the Minister. Over both our parliamentary lives, we've often debated, and debated well across the chamber, and I know perfectly well that if he's able to make or clarify the government position before the Taylor Review is published, then I'm sure he will do so. But I also know, Madam Chairman, that he's also a loyalist, and he will probably be the last minister standing who believes in collective responsibility. So the buttering up has to be accompanied by some sense of reality about how far ministers can go in helping to clarify government policy. And my aim of this debate, as I hope the Minister knows, is not to have a preview, although if he wishes to give it, of the Taylor report, that would be wonderful, but on one area of the transport executives, whether he can help them clarify the powers they have
to give licences to companies like Uber. And I will dwell in a moment on where I see Uber both contributing positively and being a destructive force for many people's living standards. This debate begins with a report that was published, The Wild West Workplace, a report on Hermes. And this and the two subsequent reports have my name on, but also Andrew Falsey, who works with me. The truth is, as we know, as MPs, it's often the other name on the report who's actually done the work, and I pay tribute to him for the extraordinary way, amongst all his other activities, of being Chief of Staff of my office, of getting me away from elephant traps, of trying to make as positive a contribution I can to the House of Commons. He can take on work of this nature. So the second report was Sweated Labour, which was on Uber, and the third one, which will be published tomorrow, is a new contract for the gig economy. Again, I want to record in this debate that when Andrew and I, very much Andrew, completed that first report on the Wild West Workplace, we wrote to the Prime Minister. And we said that the circumstances we described shocked me, and my guess it would actually shock her. And it was certainly at variance with the statement that she made when she first became Prime Minister, talking about the sort of society that she wished to create and the protection she wished to extend to those who were weakest. If we look at the reports, any three of the reports, tomorrow, by all means, people can have, they would love copies of the new contract. There are four forces pushing down wages in this particular area. Now, I'm not saying, and I hope the Minister will accept this, there's nothing I've ever said or published which doesn't admit that Uber-type conditions certainly serve a large part of consumers' wishes for quick and cheap transport, nor that maybe many Uber workers are very content with their lot as shovelled out by Uber under what I think is a bogus self-employed contract. I'm talking about those who regularly write to Andrew and I, giving more examples of, first of all, how bogus the self-employed contract is, that they are forced to work under, and also the appalling conditions that those employers get away with. Because, as you know, they not only get away with, for some workers, incredibly low wages, they don't pay their fair share in taxes, so that one would have, I would hope, the Chancellor of the Exchequer on the Minister's side, that if we're interested in VAT returns, national insurance returns, and income tax returns, we would actually be rather keen in what the Minister says today, and what the Taylor Review is going to come up with, I hope, next week, but maybe the Minister will be able to tell us a date for that publication. But the four ways wages are pushed down for those who suffer worst in this gig economy are very low fares, which have been cut in recent years, which some people think is great fun because they can get home cheaply, the high rates of commission demanded by the company, which now varies very clearly between newer workers trying to make a decent living out of being a driver and older drivers who, thank God, are more protected. Although may be saying that statement, we'll have that image changed by the people that made contact after the debate. The cost of renting the right vehicle, which meets Uber's very strict requirements to be an Uber driver, and the cost of refuelling and maintaining each vehicle. Those are the downward forces in the economy which make it very difficult for people to make a decent living, and indeed, as I'm going to argue, to make a living which, to which they're covered by the statutory minimum wage. And I welcomed George Osborne in the last Parliament when he initiated that strategy. I think it's very important to try and protect people at the very bottom of our society, I saw the then Chancellor's move as a very welcomed one. But we know, in fact, that it fails by the way Uber and other companies get round how people earn, how they earn, what they earn, the hours they undertake, and their status of employment. The Taylor report, which I say the government responded to Andrew's report by establishing the Taylor Review, is about to report soon, and we hope they're going to accept the main recommendation that Andrew and I have been campaigning on, and that is that the definition of hours of work is immensely important in this area, and that on the basis of a satisfactory definition of hours worked, satisfactory to the workers rather than to Uber, we would actually get the minimum wage applied on an hourly basis. Hence, then, to the real kernel of this debate, and where I would love the Minister to be able to respond. Uber and similar companies are registering, we know in London, in Leeds, in Liverpool, and in Glasgow, and getting licences, as they have to, from the transport executive of those areas. Now, is it because the legislation is unsure, difficult to interpret, that these transport executives are not, in fact, saying that these are the minimum conditions you, the company, must meet if you wish us to grant you a licence to operate in our area? I would like to hear the Minister's view on this. I think the position is quite clear. It just takes a few, or at least one transport authority, to say this is the interpretation, given that we haven't, although here in London, Sadiq Khan has thankfully said he's unsure about Uber and is giving them a very short licence to continue to carry out their business while this essential issue is debated. But is the Minister in a position today to give us a clearer ruling, the encouragement he might give to transport authorities that they, in fact, do have powers, and the government, in that spirit that the Prime Minister spoke of when she perhaps unexpectedly became Prime Minister, that they behave within that culture. Now, let me conclude, and therefore I'm more than happy if anybody wants to intervene. Lillian, please.
Thank my right honourable friend for allowing me to raise a question. I think he's touched on some of the troubling issues that we face in the current employment market, particularly in relation to private vehicles. The Law Commission looked at some of these issues when it published its report in 2014, but since then, Uber's share of the market and the Deregulation Act are new factors. Even as we await publication of the Taylor Review, does he agree with me that there is a clear case for looking again at the regulation of the taxi and private hire sector more generally?
I do. I'm grateful I gave way. It's put better than actually I've put it, so that's another way of putting the question to the Minister. But let me conclude. I think we've had in recent history, two great movements in our history as a country. One was the movement of people from the countryside into the town. And decent people then sought to try and find out what was happening to their fellow citizens, who were horrified by the exploitation that they suffered. We had local statistical societies in all our towns that we represent here in the House of Commons, and that theme was taken up by the House of Commons in its select committee reports, the House of Lords in royal commissions, and the government setting up a national statistical service. I think the second big movement, which has occurred in our lifetime, because sometimes one's unaware of just how big it is, has been the falling away of the bottom of the labour market, in which we're now in a situation that I would have thought it was inconceivable that this would happen when I first came into the House in 1979, where people are scrambling around for jobs, where the idea that was almost a law of nature as I was growing up, that our economy would produce jobs giving family wages which would form the basis in which people could marry and begin their families securely. For, I think, an increasing number of our fellow citizens, that is a world which has long since passed them. I'm not going to be controversial like there was in the other debate, and I think also what's been happening at the bottom has been much affected by what the government calls welfare reform, which I prefer to call welfare cuts. But it's in the spirit of the minister, who I know is very much one of those of the Tory party, the other side of the House, who has a sense of what the human spirit is about and why that we are here. That he may be able to help us in just one small area of the whole role that transport authorities could play in protecting. Secondly, I would hope he's going to reply within that Prime Minister's pledge about that we were going to throw a new form of protection over the bottom end, the vulnerable tummy of English society that's lost out so big on the changes which some of us document from our constituents. And if we cannot only be moved by our sense of wish for extending human dignity, or to make a further commitment to the Prime Minister's pledge, I would hope that the old money, the till, would play some part for the Chancellor, because the way these companies are constructed, they are fiddling. They don't pay their dues in VAT or national insurance or in income tax, which means the rest of us have to actually pay that for them. They're registering now returns on their very limited capital, which are out of this world, and I think should be tamed. And in the West, with our democratic traditions, we look for government, usually, as one of the instruments to tame the wildness of wild capitalism. And I happily turn over to the Minister.
The question is that this House has considered regulation of working conditions in the private hire industry. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What a delight to respond to a debate brought to this House by the Right Honourable Gentleman. He knows that I admire him almost as much as I admire Lord Birkenhead, F.E. Smith, who we've discussed from time to time in the past, who of course said that glittering prizes were all available to those with stout hearts and sharp minds, and the Honourable Gentleman has both of those things, as he's illustrated once again in bringing these important matters to our attention. I have a long speech prepared for me by my civil servants, who I hold in very high regard, but I'm not ever inclined to deliver speeches written for me by anyone else. And I am certainly inclined to try and answer the specific points the Honourable Gentleman has made. It seems to me these Westminster Hall debates have to fulfil a purpose greater than simply parroting things that the government's already thought or said. They have to move policy on, don't they? Well, that's how they should operate, and we'll try and make sure that happens today. So I think just to set the scene, however, and in a way he's done that for me, but it's perhaps worth affirming some of the things that he said. I am, of course, aware of the concerns regarding the changing character of the landscape in respect of taxis and private hire vehicles. He's right that technology has played a big part in that, and of course technology has a consequent effect on consumer expectations and demands. Supply changes to meet those demands because supply stimulates changing demand too, and that's precisely what's happened in this area. Taxis play a really important part in the life of London. I use taxis a lot, so do my family. My son is here in the gallery today. I might say, Mrs. Moon, who is a devotee of London cabs, and like many others before him, I hope after him. London taxis are also iconically important, aren't they? You know, one thinks of not only London, but in a sense the whole kingdom around certain totems and emblems And one of those emblems, I guess, is the London cab, the black cab. So I see these things, as he will know. He described my concern for the human spirit, but I also have a profound concern for aesthetics, in as much as aesthetics are part of how we perceive the world, how we come to terms with their own consciousness of reality. And London cabs were part of that. But they also, of course, provide a vital service, and have done, not just to tourists, but to Londoners too. It's true that the tourist looks to the London cab for the reasons I've just given. They see them as iconic. I guess if you were coming to London, you want to ride in a black cab, and if you went to New York, you might want to ride in a yellow one. But they also provide a valuable utility. And the history of London cabs is that people know what they're going to pay. They can be confident of the driver's ability to get them where they want to go as quickly as possible. And they also have a good record in terms of safety and security, which are, of course, also important matters when one gets into a vehicle with a driver one hasn't previously known, perhaps not even met. So those things are of profound and lasting importance. Nonetheless, requesting a vehicle via an app, whether a taxi or a private hire vehicle, is increasingly popular with the public, and unsurprisingly so. The desirability of being able to call up a vehicle as required is obvious, and that's having a quite significant effect on the market, as the Honourable Gentleman described. The difference, as I'm sure the whole of this chamber will know, is that a taxi, in addition to dealing with pre-booked journeys, can also apply for hire in the area in which they're licensed, and that can't be done if you're a private hire vehicle. These things do lead to different models of ownership and employment, and the Honourable Gentleman referred to that as well, and the emergence of a different set of protocols, if I can put it in those terms, in that area are also significant. He mentioned the various reports. I've read them all, by the way, including Sweated Labour, which you'll know about, and the Select Committee, who did a great service, I think, in looking at these matters rather closely, not just in respect of tax and private vehicles, but more and more widely. So he will be aware of all of those reports, as I am, and also of the ongoing legal case regarding the employment status of drivers in the private hire vehicle sector. He will appreciate, he made this very clear at the outset, actually, his expectations of me were set very low. I don't know if you noticed that. I thought a bit too low, actually, given what I'm going to say later. But he did make it very clear in his usual spirit of fairness and reasonableness. There's a limit to what I can say, and I certainly can't say anything that might prejudice that legal case. It is an ongoing matter, as he said. But what I think I can say is that the emergence of what are known, I'm using this term, of course, in its strict sense, not in a way that I hope will be misinterpreted, of so-called disruptive businesses, through the application of new technologies, enables new ways of working and creates new products and services, as I said, a different relationship between supply and demand. And that does have an appeal to certain consumers. It does provide a service that perhaps hasn't been provided before. However, these benefits must be balanced against the impact that that work in these new ways brings. For example, the greater flexibility in working arrangements can increase employment opportunities for those that have other commitments or aspirations, but we must equally be aware of the negatives. Nor must we regard the traditional private hire vehicle driver and operator relationship that rose through rose-tinted spectacles and perceive it as some sort of ideal where the operators work solely in the interests of the drivers. I am aware of the concerns that have been raised by him and others about the risks in respect of employment. Now, let me lay my cards on the table. I take a very strong view about the rights of workers. I am proud to be a member of a trade union. My father was a shop steward. I've enjoyed very close relationships with the trade unions throughout my time as a minister in each of the departments, the 6 departments in which I've been a minister, and continue to do so in the Department for Transport. And one of the problems with this sector is because of the character and nature of employment, it may well be the significance of numbers of people are underrepresented or perhaps not represented at all by anybody that can make a case on their behalf. And that does put people at a considerable disadvantage. They may not have reasonable expectations of what their entitlements ought to be even. They may not know that they're actually being underpaid if they don't have that kind of opportunity to express through a collective arrangement of a kind that a trade union brings their entitlements. I hesitate to use the word rights for philosophical reasons that I won't go further on about today because we haven't got time. But I do think lawful entitlements to fair treatment are absolutely at the heart of what good employer-employee relationships are all about, and that's what the honourable gentleman has once again implicitly advocated by bringing this matter before us today. So, I'm good to say the Honourable Lady, by the way, who is now becoming such a regular feature in my transport life that I would have been disappointed had she not been here.
Honourable Member for giving way. I listened carefully to what he said about employment rights, but is there not, does he agree with me that there's a risk because of the nature of the mobile application that there can be a temptation for employees who feel under undue pressure to work excessive hours, and this can have a very severe and detrimental impact on their health and well-being, but indeed on potentially on the health and well-being of other road users?
Yes, I think she's right that the relationship between the app or gig economy operators and their drivers is very different to what we've experienced previously. And she's right too that that does bring challenges and may even bring significant risks. Now, as I say, I don't want to say too much because there is a legal case ongoing, and the Taylor report, which the Honourable Gentleman, to which the Honourable Gentleman referred, is also awaited. But I think what the House needs to know is that I am very conscious of this. I don't come to the matter with any prejudices, apart from the prejudice that I've described, which is that people should be treated fairly in their place of work. I've always believed that and will do all I can to make sure it happens. Yes, oh, sorry, Frank, yes.
Grateful to the Minister. Are we able to conclude from what he just said that while he may not be able to satisfy demands which I asked for today, that the Minister would encourage transport authorities to interpret the law in the way that he thinks, so that the most vulnerable are protected, because as Uber says, stacks of workers are so pleased with what we do. So it only, if we're to believe Uber, that any ruling would affect a minority, but a crucial minority. Can we expect him to say something about that today, or will that follow through from the Taylor report itself, who might be dealing with this specifically, and particularly that people should be able to earn the national minimum wage by hour of work, rather than the way Uber gets round it for many people now?
Well, I may have some good news, Honourable Gentleman, in that respect. Right, Honourable Gentleman, in that respect, forgive me. And I'll save that for the very end of my speech in order to build excitement. So when I begin my pre-peroration, he can wait expectantly for the final part of my speech, in which I think I'll be able to give him positive news of the kind that he just mentioned. So moving now, so that excitement can build, because I like to give people notice of these things, to my pre-peroration. The commitment I gave to the interests of working people and their pay and conditions is unsurprising, given the party of which I'm a member. In my ministerial office, I have a bust of Lord Shaftesbury. Lord Shaftesbury, the great Tory 19th century social reformer against Liberal opposition, did so much to free people from children from factories, fought for the ragged school movement, helped to reform the mental, the conditions of those with mental health by entering asylums. Mine is the party of Wilberforce, of Shaftesbury, as well as Disraeli. Of course I care about the welfare of the people and their interests. It's unsurprising that I should do so. But that has to be a modern reality too. And as the Honourable Gentleman said, we live in a different world now to the one that Shaftesbury and Disraeli and Wilberforce encountered, but human frailties remain. And the human willingness to do bad things, unfortunately, is endemic following the fall from the state of grace. So having said all of that, let me move to what I propose to do about this particular matter. And it is this. I don't think it's good enough simply to wait for the Taylor report, although we must consider that very carefully. It is a wider report dealing with the changing employment conditions to which we've been briefly considering today. So I'm going to set up a working party in my department with an independent chairman to look at the specific things the honourable gentleman has raised as a result of this debate. I will consider in due course the terms and conditions of that working party, its membership, and how it might have an effect on future policy. Furthermore, as he requested, I will look at the guidance that's issued to local authorities who may be unaware of the extent of their powers and certainly may be unaware of their ability to use them. He's right to say there are problems with different local authorities interpreting those powers in different ways, and it seems to me very important that we should give clarity about that through the advice that we offer to local authorities. And finally, let me say this. I will engage both with him, and I invite him to come to my department and meet my officials accordingly, with the representatives of drivers and operators. Let us have an adult, grown-up discussion about this. Let us expose what's wrong and celebrate what's right. But there will be no veil, no mask, nowhere to hide for people that don't do the right thing.
The question is that this House has considered...
It's 4:30. Slightly long sentence.
Sorry, order. We have now reached 4:30. I appreciate that, but I'm advised that because we have to keep to time for the next debate, and on the adjournment, order. We now move to the next debate. As people are leaving the chamber, can I just advise officials they should not enter the chamber and loiter around the door before the debate is called. Thank you. It is warm. If anyone wishes to take their jacket off, yes, that's fine. Order. Stephen Doughty to move the motion.
Mrs Moon, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today for this important debate. I beg to move that this House has considered the political and humanitarian situation in Yemen. And I'm delighted to be able to speak to this issue today and to be granted this debate so early in the new Parliament, particularly given the pressing nature of the humanitarian crisis, not least in regards to cholera in recent weeks, which we will have all seen on our television screens. Sadly, Mrs Moon, as many members will be aware, this is one of many debates we have